I mocked the waitress who loved a pop star. Then I saw her singing on TV. The fluorescent lights of the diner hummed a low, grating song, a soundtrack to my own internal monologue of impatience. Rain lashed against the smeared window panes, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the glass, mirroring the persistent thrum of annoyance in my chest. I was late, of course, always late. And this particular diner, with its chipped Formica tables and the lingering scent of stale coffee, was the epicenter of my current frustration. My phone buzzed again, a sharp, demanding sound that made me flinch. Another client, another demand. My life, it felt, was a constant juggling act of appeasing others, a performance I'd honed to a razor's edge. But tonight, the juggling balls felt particularly slippery, coated in the slick, cold dread of another missed deadline. Across from me, perched on a cracked vinyl stool, sat Maya. She was the waitress, the one who'd been assigned my table, and frankly, the one who was currently embodying everything I found irritating about this entire endeavor. Her movements were slow, deliberate, almost languid, as if the very concept of urgency was foreign to her. She'd taken my order with a soft smile, a smile that, to my increasingly frayed nerves, felt like a deliberate act of sabotage. Her name tag, a small, slightly crooked rectangle of plastic, read Maya, beneath it a small hand-drawn heart. I'd noticed it earlier, a detail that had, at the time, registered as nothing more than an insignificant quirk. Now, however, it felt like a personal affront. I'd ordered the club sandwich, extra crispy bacon, no pickles and a black coffee, no sugar. Simple, straightforward, yet it had taken her an age to bring it. An age measured in the agonizingly slow sweep of her gaze across the menu board, the gentle clinking of plates as she refilled other customers' water glasses with an almost ceremonial slowness. Each pause, each seemingly innocent delay, felt like a deliberate act of defiance against my own desperate need for speed. I tapped my fingers on the table, a staccato rhythm that I hoped conveyed the urgency of my internal clock. I glanced at my watch, then back at her as she approached, balancing my plate with an unnerving steadiness. "Here you go," she said, her voice a low murmur, barely audible above the diner's ambient noise. She placed the plate in front of me, the steam from the sandwich curling upwards, carrying the scent of toasted bread and grilled chicken. Her eyes, large and dark, met mine for a fleeting second, and in that instant, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A spark. Not the usual tired resignation I'd come to expect from service industry workers, but something brighter, something almost incandescent. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same soft, almost dreamy expression. I barely registered the sandwich. My focus was entirely on her, on the way she moved, on the way she seemed to exist in a different temporal plane. "You're really slow, you know that?" The words were out before I could stop them, a sharp, unbidden jab. It was the kind of comment I'd learned to suppress, to keep buried beneath layers of professional politeness. But tonight, the dam had broken. The pressure of my own unmet expectations, the looming deadlines, the sheer inconvenience of it all, had boiled over. Her smile faltered just for a second. A minuscule shift, so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. But I didn't miss it. I saw the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her shoulders seemed to draw inward. She didn't respond, just nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement of her head. She turned and walked away, her back to me, her movement still unhurried. But now, to my hypersensitive perception, imbued with a new weight. A quiet dignity that I, in my frantic rush, had completely overlooked. I felt a prickle of something akin to guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by the insistent clamor of my own anxieties. I ate my sandwich, the flavors muted, my mind already racing ahead to the next task, the next call, the next person I needed to impress. I dismissed her, categorized her, filed her away as another obstacle in my path, another cog in the vast, indifferent machinery of my day. The rain continued its relentless assault. The diner's lights seemed to flicker more erratically now, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. I paid the bill, leaving a perfunctory tip, and stepped out into the downpour, pulling my collar tighter against the biting wind. The encounter, I told myself, was insignificant. A brief, unpleasant interaction with someone who clearly didn't understand the demands of my world. I'd forgotten about it almost as soon as I'd left, the memory already being overwritten by the urgent demands of my professional life. It was a fleeting moment of human friction, nothing more. Or so I thought. I never imagined that this brief, dismissive encounter, born of my own impatience and a deep-seated arrogance, would be the catalyst for a seismic shift within me, a reckoning that would force me to confront the very foundations of my own moral compass. I was so focused on the destination, I never saw the detour that was about to unfold, a detour that would lead me to a place of profound, unexpected self-discovery. My usual routine after a late-night work session was to retreat into the comforting anonymity of my apartment, to drown out the residual anxieties of the day with the glow of a screen and the quiet hum of solitude. But tonight, something compelled me to take a different route, a detour that felt almost instinctual, a subtle pull away from the familiar path. I found myself driving aimlessly, the wipers of my car swishing back and forth, a rhythmic pulse against the steady drumming of the rain. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, abstract paintings on the wet canvas of the night. My mind, usually a relentless engine of to-do lists and strategic planning, felt strangely quiet, a rare moment of stillness amidst the constant churn. It was in this suspended state, this liminal space between the hurried demands of my professional life and the quiet solitude of my personal one, that the unexpected happened. Flipping through the channels on the small television in my living room, a channel I rarely, if ever, watched, I landed on a local news broadcast. The segment was about emerging local artists, a segment I'd usually skip without a second thought. But this time, my hand froze on the remote. On the screen, a young woman was singing. Her voice, raw and clear, filled the small space, a melody that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the rain-soaked night. There was an intensity in her performance, a passion that was palpable, a complete surrender to the music. It was captivating. And then, as the camera panned out slightly, catching her profile, a jolt went through me. It was Maya, the waitress from the diner, the one I'd dismissed so readily, so carelessly. She was singing a ballad, a song I vaguely recognized, but her rendition was entirely her own. Her eyes, which I'd seen as merely large and dark, were now alight with an almost otherworldly glow. Her hands, which I'd perceived as slow and deliberate, now moved with a fluid grace, sketching invisible lines in the air, emphasizing the emotional arc of the lyrics. The slight hesitancy I'd mistaken for slowness, the quiet demeanor I'd interpreted as disinterest, were now revealed as the quiet strength of an artist deeply immersed in her craft. The name tag with the hand-drawn heart, which I'd dismissed as a childish affectation, now seemed like a symbol of her genuine, unpretentious passion. She wasn't slow. She was deliberate. She wasn't uninterested. She was focused. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a performer, pouring her heart and soul into a song. The stark contrast between the Maya I had encountered at the diner and the Maya on my television screen was jarring. The image of her politely taking my order, enduring my thinly veiled impatience, was superimposed with this vibrant, confident artist commanding a spotlight, even if it was just a small, local one. My earlier judgment, so swift and absolute, now felt like a gaping chasm of my own making. I had seen her through the narrow lens of my own immediate needs, reducing her to a mere function, a service provider. I hadn't seen the person, the individual with her own dreams, her own talents, her own internal world that existed far beyond the confines of that diner. The weight of my rudeness, the casual cruelty of my dismissal, settled upon me with an almost physical force. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a hot wave of shame washing over me. I had been so quick to judge, so certain of my own superiority, that I had completely failed to recognize the inherent worth and beauty in another human being. The camera lingered on her face as she hit a particularly powerful note, her expression one of pure, unadulterated joy. It was a look of someone who had found their element, their purpose. And in that moment, I understood. I understood the depth of my own superficiality, the arrogance that had blinded me to the richness of the world around me. My own life, so consumed by external validation and the relentless pursuit of success, suddenly felt hollow. I had been so busy climbing my own ladder, I'd forgotten to look around and appreciate the diverse tapestry of human experience unfolding at my feet. The rain outside seemed to soften, the drumming on the window pane now a gentle whisper, as if the world itself was acknowledging the quiet shift occurring within me. This wasn't just about a waitress singing on TV. It was about my own profound failure to truly see, another person. The emotional fallout from that unexpected broadcast was immediate and disorienting. The club sandwich I'd so impatiently consumed felt like a lead weight in my stomach, a physical manifestation of my own indigestible arrogance. I replayed the diner scene in my mind, not with the self-righteous indignation I'd felt at the time, but with a growing sense of mortification. I remembered the way her smile had faltered, the almost imperceptible slump of her shoulders after my sharp words. I had been so caught up in the perceived injustice of my own delay, I hadn't considered the impact of my own behavior on her. She had been kind, polite, and efficient within the constraints of her job, and I had repaid that with a dismissive insult. It was a small act, a fleeting moment in the grand scheme of my busy life, but it now loomed large, a stark illustration of my own lack of empathy. I found myself scrutinizing my own interactions, not just with Maya, but with everyone I encountered. The barista who always seemed a little too cheerful, the delivery driver who arrived a few minutes late, the colleague who asked a question I deemed obvious. Had I been so quick to judge them all? Had I reduced them to their roles, their perceived shortcomings, without ever considering the possibility of their own hidden depths, their own unspoken struggles, their own private passions? The thought was unsettling, a cold dread that seeped into the edges of my consciousness. My world, which had always felt so ordered and controllable, suddenly seemed messy, filled with individuals whose inner lives I had utterly failed to acknowledge. The following days were a quiet torment. The usual satisfaction I derived from closing a deal or exceeding a target felt hollow. The applause, the accolades, the markers of my success, all seemed to ring with a false note. I was a performer in my own life, but the audience I was most desperately trying to impress was myself, and I was failing. I found myself returning to the diner, not out of any specific plan, but out of a vague, gnawing need for something. I'd sit at a different table, order something simple, and watch Maya. I observed the way she navigated the bustling lunch rush, her movements still unhurried, but now, to my awakened senses, imbued with a quiet confidence. She still had that soft smile, but it no longer felt like a passive acceptance of her role. It felt like a genuine warmth, a quiet resilience. One afternoon, a particularly demanding customer, a man whose voice boomed with entitlement, began to berate her over a minor error in his order. My gut reaction, the old me, would have been to tune it out, to focus on my own work, to avoid any potential entanglement, but this time, I couldn't. I saw the familiar flicker of distress in Maya's eyes, the way she physically shrank under his verbal assault. Without conscious thought, I stood up and walked over to their table. I didn't confront the man directly. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I caught Maya's eye and offered a small, reassuring nod, a silent acknowledgement of her discomfort. Then, I turned to the angry customer and, in a calm, measured tone, asked if everything was all right, subtly drawing his attention away from her. He grumbled something unintelligible and turned back to his food, his outburst effectively diffused. Maya looked at me then, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, followed by a genuine, unforced smile. It was a different smile this time, not dreamy, but grateful. And in that shared glance, a silent understanding passed between us, a recognition of shared humanity that transcended our roles. It wasn't a grand gesture, no dramatic intervention. It was a small act of quiet solidarity, a subtle redirection. But for me, it was monumental. It was the first time I had actively chosen empathy over self-preservation, connection over indifference. It was the moment the old judgment began to crumble, replaced by a nascent understanding. The conflict wasn't resolved in a single dramatic act, but in a series of small internal shifts, each one chipping away at the hardened shell of my own ego. The consequences of my initial rudeness were not just external. They were deeply internal, forcing a painful but necessary confrontation with my own character. The following week I saw Maya again, not at the diner, but at a small, independent music venue on the other side of town. She was on a tiny stage, bathed in a single spotlight, her guitar cradled in her arms. The same raw, captivating voice that had filled my living room now filled the intimate space, weaving a spell over the hushed audience. She introduced her next song, her voice steady, her smile warm. "This one's for anyone who's ever felt underestimated," she said, and the crowd, a mix of old and young artists and observers, erupted in applause. I stood at the back, near the exit, a silent observer in the periphery. I didn't approach her. There was no need. The redemption I sought wasn't in an apology, but in the quiet understanding that had begun to bloom within me. Watching her perform, I realized that her talent wasn't a secret to be discovered, but a light she chose to share when and where she felt ready. My own intrusion into her moment at the diner had been a violation, a clumsy attempt to impose my own narrative onto her life. Her singing on television, her performing at this small venue, these were her choices, her expressions, her way of navigating the world. My role was not to judge or to interfere, but simply to witness, and perhaps to learn. The shame I had felt earlier had transformed into a quiet gratitude. Gratitude for the unexpected encounter, for the uncomfortable truth it had revealed, for the slow, unfolding process of seeing beyond my own limited perspective. I left the venue before her set was over, the music still echoing in my ears. The rain had stopped, and the night air was cool and clean. The city lights, no longer blurred by water, seemed sharper, more vibrant. I drove home, not with the frantic energy of someone trying to outrun their obligations, but with a sense of quiet purpose. The overwhelming need to impress, to achieve, to be recognized, had receded, replaced by a gentler, more profound desire. The desire to simply be present, to truly see the people around me, to acknowledge the quiet dignity in every human interaction. My life wasn't a performance to be judged, but a series of moments to be experienced, to be shared, to be understood. The harshness I had projected outwards had been a shield for my own insecurities, a defense mechanism built from a deep-seated fear of not being enough. Maya, in her quiet strength and undeniable talent, had shown me that perhaps, just perhaps, I already was. The lingering image of Maya, bathed in that single spotlight, her voice soaring with an unburdened joy, stayed with me. It wasn't about her music, not entirely. It was about the quiet dignity I had failed to recognize, the hidden depths I had so carelessly overlooked. My world felt different now, less a battlefield of deadlines and demands, and more a tapestry of interwoven lives, each with its own unique melody. The arrogance that had once defined me felt like a shed skin, leaving me vulnerable, yes, but also open, receptive. The journey from judgment to understanding had been a painful one, marked by shame and a profound sense of inadequacy. But it had also been a liberation. The need to prove myself, to constantly strive for external validation, had begun to loosen its grip. In its place, a quiet contentment was taking root, a sense of peace that came from simply being present, from acknowledging the humanity in every encounter, from recognizing the silent songs that everyone carries within them. The world still hums with its own demanding rhythm, but I no longer feel the desperate need to control its tempo. Instead, I find myself listening, truly listening, to the individual notes, the unique harmonies, the unspoken melodies that make up the symphony of life, and in the quiet spaces I hear my own song, finally finding its tune. The quiet hum of the diner, once a source of irritation, now felt like a gentle backdrop to a more profound internal dialogue. My perception had shifted, like a lens snapping into sharp focus, revealing a complexity I'd previously ignored. It wasn't just about Maya's singing. It was about the very nature of recognizing value, of seeing beyond the superficial roles we assign to each other. Consider the subtle ways we categorize people based on their professions. The gatekeepers of knowledge, the hands that build, the voices that entertain. I had, for so long, operated under this rigid system, assigning worth based on perceived status and immediate utility. My encounter with Maya had begun to dismantle this internal architecture. It wasn't just that she was a talented singer, it was that her talent existed independently of her role as a waitress, a fact I had been too self-absorbed to acknowledge. Furthermore, this realization extended beyond individual interactions and began to color my understanding of my own motivations. The relentless pursuit of external validation, the need for accolades and recognition, suddenly seemed like a hollow endeavor. It was as if I had been chasing a phantom, a reflection in a distorted mirror rather than seeking genuine fulfillment. Now, contemplating Maya's quiet dedication to her art, her evident joy in creation regardless of audience size or critical acclaim, I saw a different path. A path where worth was not measured by external metrics but by internal resonance, by the quiet satisfaction of pursuing something that genuinely mattered, something that spoke to the core of one's being. This shift wasn't about abandoning ambition, but about redefining its purpose. Building on this, however, I started to question the very definition of success I had so fiercely adhered to. My professional life, built on a foundation of quantifiable achievements, felt suddenly incomplete. I had excelled at climbing ladders, but had I ever stopped to consider if they were leaning against the right walls? The introspection forced by Maya's unexpected appearance on my television screen was not merely an emotional reaction. It was an intellectual re-evaluation. It prompted me to consider how many other Mayas existed in my life, individuals whose potential I had overlooked, whose contributions I had minimized, simply because they didn't fit neatly into my predefined categories of importance. Consequently, the world around me began to reveal itself in a new light. The mundane tasks I had previously dismissed as mere necessities, the quiet routines of others, started to carry a new weight. Now consider how this applies when you observe the seemingly mundane efforts of those around you. The meticulous care a gardener takes with a patch of soil, the patient repetition of a craftsman honing their skill, the quiet dedication of a teacher guiding young minds. These were not just jobs, they were expressions of dedication, of passion, of a unique human spirit finding its outlet. My former self would have seen only the function. My emergent self began to see the artistry, the inherent value in the act of creation itself, regardless of its perceived scale or societal recognition. This perspective shift wasn't just about appreciating others, it was about fundamentally altering my own internal compass, recalibrating what I valued and how I measured my own worth. Conversely, this burgeoning awareness also brought with it a profound sense of responsibility. If I had been so blind to the inherent worth of others, what other injustices had I unknowingly perpetuated? The casual dismissals, the fleeting judgments, the unacknowledged kindnesses, they all represented missed opportunities for genuine connection, for recognizing the shared humanity that binds us. It was a humbling realization, one that demanded a conscious effort to actively seek out and acknowledge the value in every individual, regardless of their station or perceived role. This wasn't about grand gestures of altruism, but about a subtle yet fundamental shift in perception, a commitment to seeing the person behind the profession, the artist behind the apron. It was about understanding that true richness lies not in the accumulation of status, but in the depth of our connections and the breadth of our empathy. The initial shock of Maya's television appearance had been a powerful jolt, but the true impact was in the subsequent ripple effect it had on my daily observations. It wasn't just about recognizing talent, it was about recognizing the effort that talent represented. Before, I saw the polished product, the perfectly delivered lines, the flawlessly executed service. Now I began to notice the unseen practice, the countless hours of rehearsal, the quiet persistence required to achieve even a semblance of mastery. Consider the way a seasoned barista can steam milk into a velvety microfoam, creating intricate latte art with seemingly effortless grace. What I once perceived as mere skill was, in fact, the culmination of hundreds, perhaps thousands of attempts, each one a small lesson learned, a subtle adjustment made. This granular understanding of applied effort began to shift my perspective on perceived slowness or lack in others. Building on this, however, I started to see how my own definition of productivity had been dangerously narrow. My focus had always been on output, on tangible results delivered within tight deadlines. This led me to view anything that deviated from that path as inefficient, even lazy. Yet witnessing Maya's transformation from diner waitress to performer highlighted a different kind of productivity, one rooted in intrinsic motivation and a deep engagement with one's craft. This kind of engagement, while perhaps not always immediately quantifiable in terms of output, fostered a different kind of growth, a deeper understanding, and a more sustainable form of contribution. Now, when I observe someone meticulously organizing a chaotic workspace or patiently explaining a complex concept multiple times, I don't see a delay. I see a commitment to thoroughness, a dedication to ensuring the foundation is solid before moving forward. Consequently, my interactions began to change in subtle yet significant ways. Instead of impatiently nudging a colleague to finish a report, I found myself asking about their process, about any roadblocks they might be encountering. This wasn't about micromanaging. It was about acknowledging that their pace, while different from mine, might be dictated by a desire for quality, a need for a deeper understanding, or simply a different cognitive rhythm. I started to appreciate the quiet dedication of the janitorial staff who arrived before dawn to ensure the building was pristine, a task often invisible and unacknowledged. Their work, while not directly tied to my immediate professional goals, was essential to the smooth functioning of the entire environment, a testament to their own form of focused dedication. Conversely, this newfound appreciation for effort also began to illuminate the often unseen emotional labor involved in many roles. The patience required to de-escalate a frustrated customer, the emotional resilience needed to navigate difficult interpersonal dynamics, the sheer mental energy expended in maintaining a pleasant demeanor under pressure, these were all forms of effort that had previously been invisible to me. Now, when I encountered a service worker who offered a genuine smile and a moment of kind interaction, I didn't just see politeness, I recognized the conscious choice to extend warmth, a small act of emotional generosity in a world that often felt transactional. It was a reminder that behind every interaction, there is a human being expending energy, both visible and invisible, to navigate their day. Another crucial layer is the understanding that true growth often occurs in the quiet, unobserved moments. The hours Maya spent practicing her guitar in solitude, the countless times she likely stumbled through lyrics before finding her voice. These were the crucibles where her talent was forged. My own life, so focused on public achievements, had perhaps neglected the importance of these private disciplines. Now consider how this applies when you're working on a personal project or learning a new skill. The initial awkwardness, the fumbling attempts, the moments of doubt are not signs of failure, but essential components of the learning process, the necessary groundwork for future mastery. It's in these often unseen moments of diligent practice and quiet perseverance that genuine transformation takes root. The realization that true growth often occurs in the quiet, unobserved moments, the hours Maya spent practicing her guitar in solitude, the countless times she likely stumbled through lyrics before finding her voice. These were the crucibles where her talent was forged. My own life, so focused on public achievements, had perhaps neglected the importance of these private disciplines. Now, consider how this applies when you're working on a personal project or learning a new skill. The initial awkwardness, the fumbling attempts, the moments of doubt are not signs of failure, but essential components of the learning process, the necessary groundwork for future mastery. It's in these often unseen moments of diligent practice and quiet perseverance that genuine transformation takes root. Furthermore, this understanding of dedication extends beyond individual skill development into the realm of community and collective well-being. Think about the quiet dedication of volunteers who show up week after week to support local shelters, their efforts often unseen by the wider public. They aren't seeking applause or recognition. Their reward lies in the tangible impact of their consistent commitment. This mirrors Maya's own journey. Her passion for music, nurtured in private, eventually bloomed into a public performance. Similarly, the small, consistent acts of kindness and support within a community, though rarely making headlines, build a strong, resilient social fabric. Now, consider how this applies when you encounter a neighbor who consistently maintains their shared garden space, or a colleague who quietly mentors newer team members. Their contributions, often overlooked, are vital threads in the larger tapestry of our shared environment. Building on this, however, the concept of intrinsic motivation emerges as a powerful counterpoint to externally driven ambition. My previous drive was fueled by a desire for recognition, for climbing a corporate ladder, for achieving a certain status. This external validation, while initially satisfying, proved to be a fleeting and ultimately hollow pursuit. Maya, on the other hand, was driven by an internal fire, a genuine love for her craft. This intrinsic motivation allowed her to persevere through challenges that might have deterred someone solely focused on external rewards. Now, consider how this applies when you're faced with a task that feels tedious or unrewarding. Instead of focusing on the potential outcome or recognition, try to find the inherent satisfaction in the process itself, in the act of doing, in the small moments of mastery or learning that occur along the way. The quiet recognition of shared humanity, the appreciation for the unseen currents that guide us all, is the enduring melody that now plays beneath the surface of everyday noise. This journey has underscored the profound interconnectedness of our actions and perceptions, demonstrating how a shift in one can illuminate the entirety of our relational world. The focus has broadened from the individual outcome to the underlying process, from the readily apparent to the deeply embedded. The world continues to spin, its demands ever present, but the internal landscape has been irrevocably altered. The quiet recognition of shared humanity, the appreciation for the unseen currents that guide us all, is the enduring melody that now plays beneath the surface of everyday noise. The true practice begins now, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet cultivation